Hey everybody, and welcome to the Alabama Take. I'm your host, Corey Hanna. On this week's episode, we're talking to Caleb Johnbson, author of Treeborne.
Is it going to be like Mark Maron where we're just going to start talking and you're going to tell me you're recording?
You've obviously never listened to our podcast.
Yeah, I'm recording already. Yeah, so we are in a fancy recording studio today, also known as Blaine Duncan's car. So if you hear some whirring in the background, that's probably just the air conditioner because it is hot as shit in Alabama today. So we're here. We're going to record. Blaine and I are going to sort of tag team this one a little bit today. He's one of his longtime buddies, Caleb C.R. Johnbson, author, is here today. We're going to interview him and talk to him about his new book called Treeborne. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Blaine, and we may pass this one back and forth.
All right, Caleb, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, dude. I've never been so happy to be in a car with a couple handsome men.
So here's the deal. You are an original member of the Alabama Take.
I am.
From 8 years ago.
It's got to be more than 8, right?
No, it's 9.
Closer to 9, 10.
It's 9 or 10, yeah. And yes, because we even started it before.
Yeah, because 8 years ago I left Alabama, so it was before that.
Okay, so
because it had a little bit of a run.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, we may have even started before you and I lived together.
Uh-huh.
Which would have been maybe even 11. Okay,
I think we might have. I think we should say a decade for posterity, and it makes it sound a little more important.
The Alabama Take's been around for 10 years, give or take the hiatus, right? So, but before we get into that, that's all we need to say about that. But Treeborne was released June 22nd. Correct me. Am I right about that?
June 5th.
June 5th.
June 22nd was yesterday, my friend.
Okay, don't ask me about dates, but so June 5th, and talk to me about. Well, let's get into the book a little bit, and then I want to talk about the reaction that you've experienced with it. Treeborne's about this family whose last name is Treeborne, who lives in Alberta, Alabama, fictional Alberta.
Fictional. That's important to say. Fictional Alberta, Alabama.
Not the real Alberta, which you didn't know about.
I had no clue, man. I had been into the novel for about 2 years and had some drafts and had a manuscript going. And, I named the town Alberta because Alberta is a strain of peach. Mm-hmm. And so since the peach is central to the economy of the town and it's driving mythology in a way, I thought that was a brilliant writerly move there alone at my desk to name the town Alberta after the peach. And it wasn't until a couple years later when I saw a friend of mine and of ours check in to her hometown of Alberta, Alabama on Facebook. And I saw that and my heart just kind of sank down into my gut a little bit because I knew I was too deep into it and too wrapped up into this place and the characters to change the name. And I said, well, it's just going to have to stay that, and if it's ever published, I'll just have to clarify and say it's a fictional town called Alberta, Alabama.
And it's not really located in your mind. It's not located anywhere near the real Alberta. Isn't the real Alberta south? Yeah,
it's down in Baldwin County, I believe. What
about the fictional Alberta? Do you consider it to be near that Arley, Walker County kind of area in your mind?
Well, the geography would have to be more North Alabama than South Alabama, but if you're nitpicking some of the trips that happen outside of the fictional Alberta and some of the places the characters go, it's a little too close to the Gulf Coast and to South Alabama to actually be fully in North Alabama. But I didn't want it to be able to be pinpointed down exactly like that, the geography and location. Because there are writers like Marquez and Faulkner and Lewis Norden who do a similar thing with coming up with this sort of mythological place, where they're from, but based on actual locations and geography. But you can't quite hem it in, and I found that interesting from a writer's standpoint. And I also wanted to do it to cover my rear end a little bit because I didn't want folks, readers, to say, if they thought or knew that it was an exact location, they would then be more likely to say, well, he didn't get this right. This isn't what it's like there.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to deal with that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And I ask about Arley because you're from Arley.
Yep, that's right.
Tell us where Arley is.
Arley is in Winston County, which
I said Walker County. Sorry.
Well, it's next door. It's one north from Walker County. And if you were to go to town, as we said, you would go to Jasper, which is in Walker County, because there's no town really in Winston County.
That's like folks from Green Hill, Alabama, saying they're from Florence, Alabama, probably.
Yeah.
Right across the river, but they say Florence because that's where everybody knows is from Florence.
Yeah, but I proudly never say Jasper or Walker County. I say Arley, and then when people say Harley, I say no, Arley, like with an A at the beginning, and they say, where's that? And I say, well, you know where Jasper is? And sometimes they say, yeah, and I say, drive about 20 minutes north of there out into the country. If they don't know where Jasper is, I say, you know where Birmingham is? And they say, yeah, and I say, well, drive X amount of distance from there. But I always say Arley because I'm proud to be from there, and, the book wouldn't be what it is, and I wouldn't be the writer I am if it wasn't for there. So I don't mind explaining it to folks, be they Southerners or not, where it is and where I'm from.
Yeah. So I skirted around the book. I want to get back into the book for sure. It came out June 5th. It's about the Treeborne family, really 3 particular time periods in the Treeborne family's life. We've got 1928 through about 1930, and correct me if I get any of this wrong.
You're good so far.
1958 era, and then sort of a present day era, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and it kind of centers around the matriarch Maybelle and her offspring. And there are a lot of things that happen in this family, and you managed to pack in a lot of narrative in. And this is not a 600-page epic sprawl that I would avoid. This is not even as epic, and I'm using epic in a negative way. It's not even an epic in Marquez, I think. I think that you compacted a lot of story in a short amount of pages. Like you whittled it down to the important parts, it feels like. So talk to me about writing it, and if I got any information wrong that you wanted to make sure listeners knew about before they picked up the book. How were you able to compact that much narrative in such a short amount of time, short amount of pages?
I think one reason you feel that way is because a lot of what the novel is about the Treeborne family, but I guess thematically a lot of what the novel is about memory. And once I figured that out, which was fairly early on in the writing process, much earlier than when I figured out plot things for sure. Once I figured that out, I knew that I wanted the structure of the book to sort of mimic or mirror memory and how it works for me anyway, or how I see it to work a lot of times. And so, memory is incomplete at times. It comes in fits and starts. Sometimes it starts up and goes nowhere. Sometimes it circles back. Sometimes it's a completer or more complete and satisfying thing in a narrative sense. So I think that's partially what you feel or are getting as a reader when you say that it packs a lot of narrative into not so many pages, because there are some narratives in the book that intentionally just kind of peter out, or don't kind of get the full treatment that maybe traditionally you would in a book, and that was intentional on my part. And I'm a fan of other writers, Southern and not, who have done similar things in their work.
I wasn't turned off by how much narrative there was and how much detail. Usually, if I get into a book and there's just detail after detail, I think to myself, just get on with it. This is. While your book has absolutely nothing to do with Game of Thrones, that's why I couldn't read but one of those books. I was just like, I don't care what color dress this queen was wearing. Tell me what happens next. You managed to put in some of those small facts of life, parts of life, details without it becoming tedious and boring. Is that something you consciously strive for?
Yeah, I mean, I love that as a reader myself, to the details that really make a character or a place come to life. And I was certainly aware of that and considering as I wrote the book. I think that, and I hope I didn't fall prey to this much, although I'm sure I did, because every writer of fiction can, but it doesn't take that many details to really realize a character or a place. It just takes the right, couple, the right handful. And I just tried to keep that in mind as I wrote, because one of the real joys of reading fiction in a novel, especially where you're spending so much time in a place or a few places and with a cast of characters, is the gaps you get to fill in as a reader. And so I didn't want to do all that work and take all that pleasure away from the reader, but I wanted to give enough to where you knew you were in a particular place and with a particular and maybe a little odd family that you maybe haven't spent time with in literature or fiction before.
Yeah. One of the details I feel like, I really can't say that I feel like, but one of the details that felt for me, a reader, genuine was there was, early in the novel, there's this talk, it's in those scenes from 1958, there's this description of the homes and the town, and I felt the remnants of my grandparents' place that I used to visit in the 80s, and they had some of that stuff from the 50s and 60s still lingering around their home. How did you... I think you nailed it, but what do I know? I wasn't around in 1958. Do you feel like you nailed it? And if so, what did you do? Any research to make sure, okay, they would have done this in 1958 rather than do something else?
I mean, I don't. It's not for me to say if I nailed it or not, especially at this point. That's just for whichever reader picks up the book. But
we should ask your grandmother. I mean, we should ask somebody that's been around in 1958. It felt genuine to me.
Of course.
I was like, that would happen in 1958.
And I have had a couple people read it so far. It hasn't been out long, but who have got back to me and said similar things to what you're saying now. As far as research in I guess, what I would say a traditional or kind of academic sense, no, I didn't do that much. I read a lot, and I always read a lot, mostly fiction, maybe some nonfiction, but nothing very scholarly or academic. And I talk to people and listen to people. And the novel's really, in a lot of ways, a result of the women I was raised by in my family, which some of them would have been coming of age in the 50s, Mm-hmm. And the stories they told on weekends at my grandmama's house, and the stories that were passed down to them that, of course, changed and were altered in some way, which was fine by me because I was writing fiction, and I'm kind of fascinated anyway with that idea of how stories and memories are reshaped and change over time, and who they're told to and how many times. So, I mean, I never went home or went to my great aunt or somebody like that and said, hey, I want to sit down and interview you for this book I'm writing. But of course, just being around them, and I feel like I was sort of born a close noticer, if that makes sense. And I spent the first 8 years of my life as an only child before my sister came around. And so I spent a lot of time alone, and just by nature, since I was a noticer of things, I think that's a kind of narrative research. But I'm of the mind that narrative research for me can be anything. If I watch a movie on Netflix, a dramatic film or a documentary, I'm watching it from the standpoint of what can I learn and steal and kind of take and put into my own work from here. And I can't really turn that off, especially at this point.
Does that get exhausting?
It doesn't get exhausting to me at the moment, but it can get exhausting later if folks want to discuss it, because I know not everybody's a writer or coming at it from that angle. And so it can make conversations where maybe somebody wants to talk about their enjoyment or entertainment of something, and I can't really have that discussion because that wasn't where I was coming from. I was coming from more of a craft standpoint, and I'm not saying that to say there's a good or bad or to put down anybody who watches or reads that way, but it's coming from a different angle. And so there can be, I guess it can sap a little bit of the fun out of it at a time.
I went back when I used to write songs, I would kind of do that, or my mind would always want to be open to if I could get something for a song from this movie or show, and it just got exhausting. And I even hear, as a teacher, I hear people doing that for, I'm reading this book, but I'm thinking, how could I use it in my classroom? And I just want to tell them, shut up, man, that gets old.
Yeah, I mean, I try to sometimes just turn it off and enjoy something just purely on the merits of the story and how entertaining it is. But it can be, it can be difficult for me to do, because when you're creating something, when you're a writer of any kind, or an artist, I guess, for me anyway, I feel this constant pressure. You're kind of never off the clock, and maybe some of us put more pressure on ourselves to stay on the clock and to constantly be kind of like a crow and cobbling together things or picking things and stealing them here and there. But it can be exhausting for sure.
I think when I was younger, I used to do a lot of the same thing, because I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker and I'm going to analyze every second of this. And now I find myself when somebody's like, "Oh, my kid does this with me a lot." He's like, "Well, what'd you like about that movie?" I'm like, "I don't know, man. It's just entertaining." Like, I try not to overanalyze and think about things so much from that aspect of it anymore. I try to just go in and just be entertained.
But I will say, I think too, my upbringing again, I mean, of course, like all of us, it influences a lot. But I came from a family of readers, but they were all really, I guess I could say, solely reading for entertainment, and escapism to a degree. So when I got to college and when I got around folks who were reading for other reasons, whether it was from craft or just to like analyze and think about bigger ideas or deeper things, when I was first exposed to that, maybe because I hadn't went a little far to the other end of it, to a degree, like we do oftentimes when we're exposed to new ways of thinking or new ideas, and I try now, I guess, to find more of a happy medium of it.
Yeah. So you do it sometimes with movies or shows. Is it hard to turn off with reading? Like you pick up a book and you thinking, you notice the craft of it rather than just the plot. Like I would read for plot usually, but is it hard for you to turn off?
Well, I can't. I never turn it off because I talk about this with other writer friends a lot. With books especially, there's really a finite amount of books you can read in your lifetime. You know? And like you can kind of extrapolate it out. Like say you live to be 70, and you on average read 12 books a year.
Exactly.
Like
I've done the math on this.
Yeah, you can do the math, and so it becomes a thing where I feel anyway like I better be pretty damn sure why I'm reading this book, and why I'm reading it, because I want to write novels and books for the rest of my life, is for what I can learn from it from a craft standpoint.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to books especially, I'm pretty strategic, I guess, or it would be maybe a polite way to say it. Maybe mule-headed would be how some people would put it, about what I pick, and because you just don't have but so much time as a reader.
Yeah, I'm with you. I know what you mean. And I'm that way, and I'm not a writer. So I want you to comment as much as you can. I don't want to get into spoilers. We're going to assume our listeners have not read the book. Comment on The Dirt Boy as much as you can. Can you? Can we? Or do we just leave it there?
I mean, we can comment a little bit in terms of saying, one of the times I feel like I first started to realize I was going to be a storyteller of some kind, which was sort of a tradition in my family, was when I was in, before my sister came along, and when I spent a lot of time alone in the woods on my grandmama's land, I'd come across things, whether sometimes it'd be just an odd rock formation, or it'd be a tree grown a strange way or broken off a strange way, or maybe be some trash blown or washed there, which the woods seem so vast and remote to me, even though I guess they kind of aren't at my grandmama's place looking back, but they seem that way. I just couldn't fathom why this stuff would be there, why it'd be like that. So I'd start to make up stories for it to explain it to myself, because I was a close noticer and I was curious. And, when I'd go back up to the house, my mama or grandmama or great aunts, and they'd ask what I've been doing, and then you couldn't just say, playing in the woods or whatever, messing around, whatever you're doing. Like, they wanted me to tell some kind of a story, so I learned to do that by them, because they just placed a cultural value on storytelling. And when I was in those woods making up these stories and wondering about these things and not really being able to fully explain them, I always kind of felt that beyond what I saw, there were unexplainable, or maybe you could say supernatural, or otherworldly things at work, and I think that goes back to a little bit of the spirituality I grew up in the church, and it was just easy for me to buy into the idea that there are probably things in those woods that man just doesn't know about, and even science sometimes will prove us right in that respect with new discoveries of some kinds, But I lean more, I guess, toward the supernatural. And so The Dirt Boy is I won't say too much to spoil it because I have kind of enjoyed hearing readers tell me their reaction when he kind of appears on scene. But he's sort of a result of that time and that feeling of that they're unexplainable things. And I knew as I was writing this book, which is a lot of it's set on land not so dissimilar from my grandmama's, that there was something unexplainable, or maybe some people would say magical, at play, and the Dirt Boy emerged as that thing.
How do you feel about people that being sort of a go-to conversation about the book? Like, I know you've got a lot of questions about. So, do you like that, or are you like, well, do you feel like people are missing the point, or are you tickled by it?
Man, I'm tickled by anybody wanting to have a conversation about this book at all. You know, like anybody who reads it and connects to it, good or bad, you know, or not good or bad, I say positively or negatively, you know, whatever their reaction, you know, they were paying attention and they connected to it in some way. And I knew writing it, as with any book, there are going to be some things you put in it that are simply a matter of personal taste, and that's okay for me. If
somebody's coming to you, even if it's a negative, you at least struck something with them that they felt the need to call it out and pay, you know, call some sort of attention to it. So you obviously got them in some way, I would think.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I had a lady at a reading the other night who had a problem with some of the grimmer, more violent, I guess, details in the book, and she didn't know she could read on. She told me she didn't know she could keep going beyond that. And what she kept saying though was, just the way you wrote it, it seemed so real and kind of so visceral. And to me, although I don't want anybody to not be able to read on in the book, but in a way that's a compliment too, you know, because it seemed it hit her so deep in the marrow, I guess, that she felt disturbed in a way to not be able to go on. So
did you finish it?
I haven't seen her again. She seemed, from our conversation, I would say she most likely did not finish it. Well, but you know, right. She lives in my hometown, so maybe I'll run into her next week.
If she got to the scene I think you're talking about, she got pretty far. She got well past halfway.
Yeah, so
she read half your book.
Yeah, she did, and that's more than a lot of folks will probably read.
Yeah. So, have you seen any negative reviews?
Oh man, I mean, I don't know I've seen people say negative things. I'm trying not to see any reviews, to be honest with you. That's best cool. I can, because I'm a little anxious by nature and can have my feelings hurt, even though I want to act like I can't, or tell myself I won't. So as best I can, I'm trying to avoid those. And I'll tell you a funny story about it, which is I was kind of complaining about it to a degree the other day, and a friend of ours, Lee Baines, said, man, I have seen 1-star reviews on Goodreads of Marquez and William Faulkner.
Yeah, I was one of those that gave Marquez a 1-star review. I couldn't get through that book.
And then he proceeded to screen cap some reviews like that and send them to me, you know, which I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. You know, even people who I may idolize in some way as writers, or who are considered part of the canon and you know, some of the greatest writers ever to live, have been given negative reviews, for lack of a better word. So that's important for me and my neuroses, I guess, to keep in mind.
That's good. It's good that you can ignore them. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if I can, but like I said, I'm trying to.
So I want to get one more thing about the book, and then I want to get into some other stuff. The peach, the catfish, I'm probably forgetting some other things that they seem to be symbolic in the book. Am I reading that right? I mean, is there a little more to the catfish and to the peach or did you just enjoy them as Southern cultural symbols in general?
Well, I always feel I'm kind of in icky territory as a writer to a degree if I start talking about symbolism, because to me, symbolism is a creation of the reader. Yeah, and I don't say that in a derogatory way at all. I think it's wonderful and one of the amazing parts about being a reader. But I just don't think it's ever very useful for a writer to talk about symbolism, because that's showing me that's where the point where the book, because the book is no longer mine. The book is for whoever picks it up, you know, and what they will take of it and make of it and think about it as, you know, I can't change anything or write anymore,
right.
And I can say these things, but at that point they've already read it and have formed these thoughts. But I can tell you a little bit about the peach, which was can get that nice ambient sound
There's
of the
a train,
rolling by,
Perfect.
which is
We're in a car. It's
Tuscaloosa is all get out. I think this is great.
Yeah.
The peach, though, I can tell you a quick story about it, which was in my reading. I don't like to do research, but I did a little research when I was first starting to write this novel, and I in my reading I discovered that some historians believe that Hernando de Soto and the Spanish brought the peach to what would become the South by way of the Silk Road and trade with China, and that shocked me because growing up in Alabama and eating Chilton County peaches every summer, I thought the peach. I mean, I never really thought about it. I just assumed it was a native fruit, and it seemed as Alabama to me as college football or pick any other cultural marker. So when I discovered that, I thought it was pretty fascinating. I thought maybe not a lot of other people knew about it, and I thought it would be cool to fit into a book. I didn't really want to write a straight historical version of that story, so I took it and I made it the obsession and kind of mythology of this fictional town and the people there. Because I thought it was fascinating, and I think whatever symbolism folks place on that is, I put that there for them to do that, I guess I would say. Yeah. But that's kind of the fun part for me to see what people conceive of after reading the peach mythology.
I hadn't made my mind up on what I want it to be. But the peach seems like a Southern thing, and then you found out DeSoto might have brought it over, right? Yeah. Which reminds me, Magellan brought over Alabama football. It's weird.
It's a history that a lot of folks don't know. I feel like
read a book, people.
It was kind of whitewashed when the bear came. That we forgot that deeper history. But
read a fucking book.
I'm glad the Alabama take is kind of unearthing this lost history.
We're doing the Lord's work.
Yes, we are. So let's get out of the book a little. Let's get into you. That didn't sound right. Let's not talk about the book. Let's talk about you.
All right. We might a little bit.
Okay. So you talk to me about your addiction to sweets. You have as big of addiction to sweets as I do. Am I right? Are we comparable?
I think they can rival each other. Yeah, I would say so.
You and I have this problem where if we go to a party and there's cake and we get a piece of cake, we get pissed off that they don't offer us a second or third piece of cake. Is it?
Well, I don't get pissed off because I don't wait for them to offer.
So we'll do a picture and post it at some point. Between the three of us, we'll let the listeners judge who likes sweets the most, because your boys got both of y'all beat.
Hey, liking them and what they do to you ain't quite the same thing. And there are also, I just want to point out in mine and Blaine's case, I mean, I'm speaking for you a little bit, there are physical manifestations of what sweets do to you, and there are mental and emotional manifestations of what they do to you. And we all got our own thing, Corey.
But so many years ago when we started the Alabama Tape, we just started it just a place to put goofy writing. And it's... I've kind of taken the reins and morphed it into a little more pop culture related writing, but we do have a segment called
Done Up Real Good.
Done real good.
So we want to ask you, it's our favorite segment, what's done up real good for you right now?
What is done up real good for me right now? Wow. I feel like so much is, and this is like getting a little corny, but like so much is done up real good for me right now because I've been on book tour for, almost 3 weeks and just driving around the region I love so much and seeing people I love and eating greasy food and talking about books and writing, and all that. But I'm going to go back to what is always going to be done up real good for me, which is a nice bowl of ice cream.
Yes.
And in this case, since it's hot as all hell in Alabama, it's going to be a little melted by the time I scoop it in the bowl and get around to eating it. And then since it's also, late June now?
Yeah.
What I love to do is I'll take a beautiful ripe Chilton County peach, slice it, put it on top of that ice cream, let it get a little melted, and just relish the the deliciousness and also relish the maybe more than a little bit of self-loathing I feel as I polish off that entire pint.
What? All right, Caleb Johnson's walking into the ice cream shop. What's your go-to flavor?
My go-to flavor is
are you getting it cone or cup?
Okay, so my go-to flavor is often gonna be butter pecan. If not that, it'll often be whatever cookie related flavor there is, and I'm gonna go for the cone if there is a homemade waffle cone.
Oh wow, that's hard to beat.
But if there's not a homemade waffle cone, I'm gonna get it in a bowl. But I'll tell you, there's an ice cream shop in Philadelphia where I live right now called Franklin Fountain, and they actually have a flavor called Hydrox cookie, which I guess from what I can tell,
it's like the original Oreo.
It was the original Oreo. Yeah, the Hydrox cookie.
We down here think it's the generic Oreo, but as it turns out, it was the OG Oreo.
It is, and at Franklin Fountain, they will fill you up, not in a bowl, but in a Chinese takeout container.
What?
Yes, that's what they put their ice cream in, and you get it full. I'm talking. So imagine a container of rice you get from a Chinese restaurant.
It's like a single serving for me.
You get a entire container of ice cream in this Chinese takeout box, and man, it is just so good. And their ice cream has a great texture to me because texture of ice cream is important, you know.
Yeah. I'm with you.
I don't want it to be like
I need chunks of something in my ice cream.
Exactly.
I think I do too.
And I like to be able to, you know, if you dip your spoon in it and kind of pull your spoon out, I want it to kind of stretch like taffy a little bit. You know, I don't want it to completely just like fall. I want a little bit of that in it too. And there certainly has that.
Every listener right now is just raided their freezer to see if there's any ice cream.
I think so.
Yeah, my favorite lately, well, for the past couple of years, has been the Tonight Dough. The Jimmy Fallon, Ben and Jerry's. It's got everything that your boy likes in it.
It's not a bad flavor, man. Ben and Jerry's will do you up right as far as just going to a store.
It will, and I think Blaine and I would agree that the milk and cookies Ben and Jerry's is also
it's
one of their.
It's not bad.
It's always a solid choice.
It
you know,
sounds bland, gets the job done with gusto.
It does. I agree.
Yeah. So there are some Easter eggs in Treeborne that you have put in there that I've noticed, and I'm sure others have noticed. Is there one that, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want, but is there one that, or two or three, that people have not picked up on yet? Like, you expected so-and-so to read it and message you?
Well, this is going to, and you don't have to answer it because I'm going to read the book like ASAP. But you got name-checked in an old Glory Fire song, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I think I have in a couple probably. Some released and unreleased.
He says CR, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So maybe I'm going to be on the lookout. Now that you've said that, Blaine, it just makes me think maybe you found something that I need to be on the lookout. So maybe you returned the favor to Lee and gave him a shout-out in some way.
If I may, I think Lee's shout-out's one of the more blatant ones. Isn't it?
You know, I'm not going to comment on this. I'm going to keep the listeners wanting here, I guess. But yeah, man, I did want to put a lot. It's so much about family and home and friends to me that I wanted to put some things in there, whether it was names, whether it was little anecdotes, you know, or phrases, like whatever I could jam in there. I tried to make it a little more fun for folks who have been important to me and helped me get where I am with as far as the book goes, especially.
Well, it's really sweet and it feels organic at the same time. It's not shoehorned by any.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, but every time I would come across one, I'd go, "Oh, I wonder if so and so picked up on that because I just did." And of course they did, but I'm just curious if there's one or two floating out. Maybe I'll get you off mic and figure out if there's one that somebody hasn't figured out yet.
Yeah, I tell you off the record, but I'm not going to do it on air here.
All right, last thing. Do you want to explain to listeners? You and I suppose, are the... I'm sure the phrase existed long before us, but you and I sort of popularized Done Up Real Good. You want to explain? You want to recount that one?
I do, but I can't take too much credit for it because it's really... it's a phrase that you told me, Blaine, when we lived together, and it pertained to, I don't know if you know this, Corey, but it pertained to...
I always thought it came from him, because I've done a deep dive in the last few weeks looking through old like Twitter and Instagram like hashtags, and they, from as best I could tell, I took it from him.
Well, it came from Blaine for sure, But it came from Blaine to me because when we lived together, part of what I was doing for work was some substitute teaching. And when you substitute teach in a public school in Alabama, you got to wear a collared shirt and tuck it into your khaki breeches, which means you got to iron your clothes, which is not something I often do. Actually, whenever I can help it, I don't do it. And Blaine was ironing his clothes one night and said something like, "Don't you think this shirt, it done up real good, didn't it?" And he was right. I mean, it did up real good, and mine did not. So in addition to teaching me the phrase, I'm going to put this on the record too. Blaine Duncan taught me how to iron a collared shirt like nobody's business, and I'm still an apprentice to him in that respect. But it started out with ironing clothes in our kitchen in the house we lived in together, which is hilarious and also a little sad, maybe.
Yeah, it's sad. It's deeply, darkly depressing, but. It came from my mom. My mom used to do that with my shirts, and she'd say, "Oh, Blaine, this one done up real good. I hope you wear it tomorrow." Because she'd iron all my clothes, like loving mothers, Southern mothers, obviously do. So that's the oranges have done up real good. There you go. All circles back to the Alabama take a little bit.
Yeah, people that have been listening to the podcast or paying attention to the social media posts probably wonder what in the fuck we're talking about when we say something is done up real good. Because it can be used for that, and I use it as a way to describe getting dressed up in your Sunday best and going to church, or something that you like a whole lot. You know, like that's usually what the segment on the podcast is for. It's like, what's done up real good for you right now.
But I think, I don't know what the age demographic is for the Alabama Take podcast.
60 and up, usually.
This maybe is not going to connect that much, but you maybe could even say, instead of saying something is lit, as the kids say, you might would just say it's done up real good.
That's it. You nailed it. I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah, sounds good.
Man, what a great time. Thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, thank y'all for having me in this beautiful vehicle.
Go read Treeborne, everyone. It is a pleasure. It is a complex, beautiful narrative. And hit up Caleb Johnson on Instagram and talk him into getting back on Twitter. We miss him.
And Caleb, has been nice meeting you. I've heard stories for years and years, and it's nice to be able to put a face with a name.
Well, thank you for not recounting any of those stories on this podcast, Corey.
Sounds good. Thanks, man. That'll do it for this episode. Please do me a favor and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Alabama Take, or check out thealabamatake.com. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes if you like what we're doing.